The night my mother tried to give away my house, she did it with a champagne flute in one hand and a smile so warm that half the room thought they were witnessing a beautiful family moment. There were 27 people in my parents' living room in Lexington, Kentucky. My mother had arranged white hydrangeas along the mantel. My father wore the charcoal jacket he saved for weddings and funerals. My younger brother stood beside the dining room archway looking pleased with himself, although, at that point, I wasn't sure how much he actually knew. Then my mother called me forward. "Tessa, honey, come stand with us." A woman I recognized from my parents' neighborhood association shifted a leather document case onto her lap. That was when I knew they had actually gone through with the plan. My mother opened a cream-colored folder and explained that she and Dad wanted to protect the family home for the next generation. She talked about legacy, sacrifice, continuity, and how property should never become something that divided people who loved one another. What she did not tell anyone was that the house had belonged to me for almost 9 years. She did not tell them that I had bought it when my parents were weeks away from losing it. She did not tell them I had paid the mortgage, taxes, insurance, emergency repairs, and most of the major maintenance while they lived there without paying rent. And she definitely did not tell them that the document she was placing in front of me would transfer ownership away from me. 4 days earlier, I had signed another set of papers. Those papers mattered much more. But to understand why a 38-year-old woman would sell the house where she learned to ride a bike, buried 2 dogs, spent every Christmas morning, and watched her grandmother slowly disappear into old age, I have to explain the family I came from. My name is Tessa Langford. I work in commercial property insurance. Most of my days are spent reviewing buildings after fires, storms, structural damage, plumbing failures, and very expensive human mistakes. My job is not dramatic. I read reports. I compare photographs. I ask questions people sometimes wish I wouldn't ask. Then I decide what actually happened instead of what everyone hopes happened. You would think that skill would have helped me understand my own family sooner. It didn't. Every Sunday growing up, dinner happened at the red brick house on Willow Creek Drive. My mother, Diane, treated Sunday dinner like a constitutional requirement. You could miss church, a birthday, a school concert, maybe even Thanksgiving if you had the flu, but you did not casually miss Sunday dinner. She cooked enough food for twice the number of people present and complained lovingly about how much work it was. My father, Paul, sat at the head of the table, carved whatever meat she put in front of him, and specialized in preventing uncomfortable subjects from lasting longer than 30 seconds. My brother Grant, 5 years younger than me, generally arrived late. And somehow, his entrance was always the event. Grant could bring grocery store cookies and Mom would say, "Look at you, always thinking of everyone." I could spend Saturday arranging a contractor to repair their leaking garage roof, pay the invoice, show up Sunday with a homemade dessert, and hear, "Tessa, you work too much. You should learn to relax like your brother." I used to laugh. That was one of my survival skills. Grant had other skills. He could make strangers like him in 5 minutes. He remembered bartenders' names. He could turn returning borrowed money 6 months late into a funny story about himself. He had a talent for speaking about unfinished plans as though success were merely waiting for a convenient date. For most of my 20s, I thought that was confidence. Later, I understood it was something the family had built around him. My mother displayed family photographs along an entire hallway. Grant accepting a youth baseball trophy. Grant graduating high school. Grant standing beside a used motorcycle he bought and sold within 4 months. Grant at the opening of a craft beer pop-up where he worked for one summer. Grant holding a microphone at a charity auction because someone had asked him to announce raffle numbers. There was one photograph of me from college graduation. It was half hidden behind a ceramic angel. At 30, I received an industry award after handling a complicated hotel fire claim that saved my employer several $1 million in unnecessary litigation. When I mentioned it at dinner, Mom smiled. That sounds very impressive. Then she turned toward Grant. Tell your sister what you're thinking about doing with the mobile detailing idea. I remember telling myself not to be childish. That phrase, "don't be childish," became another way I kept myself useful. The real story began when I was 29. My father had owned a small custom upholster. Why business for nearly 20 years? It was never a huge operation, but it paid their mortgage and kept them comfortable. Then he developed a serious heart rhythm problem, collapsed at the workshop, and spent months bouncing between specialists, procedures, medication changes, and restrictions. He could no longer do the physical work. The business faded quickly. My mother had worked part-time for years at a bridal boutique, mostly because she liked getting out of the house. Her income could cover groceries and utilities, but not much else. They had some savings, but the medical bills chewed through that faster than anyone admitted. Grant was 24 and had recently moved back into my parents' basement after quitting a sales job because, in his words, management didn't understand people with entrepreneurial energy. I learned how serious things were because of a certified letter. I stopped at the house one Thursday morning before work to return Dad's tablet. Mom was upstairs. Dad was asleep in the recliner. There was an envelope on the kitchen counter from the mortgage servicer. I wasn't snooping. I wish I could say I was. The envelope was already open. A paragraph visible through the folded pages mentioned acceleration of the loan and foreclosure proceedings. My stomach dropped. When Mom came downstairs, I asked her directly. Her face changed. For the first time in my life, I saw genuine fear before she could rearrange it into something more presentable. They were nearly 5 months behind. Dad's business debt had swallowed most of their remaining savings. They had been using one credit card to make payments on another. Mom had borrowed money from her sister. They had ignored calls from the lender until the calls became letters. Why didn't you tell me? My father woke at the sound of my voice. Mom folded her arms. Because you have your own life. Grant came upstairs 20 minutes later wearing sweatpants and eating cereal from the mixing bowl. When Mom told him what we were discussing, he put the bowl down, hugged her, and said, "We're not losing this house. No way." For a few seconds, I felt relieved. Then he explained his plan. He knew a guy who knew another guy who was starting a real estate investment fund. Nothing ever came of it. That evening, I drove back to my apartment and opened every financial account I had. I had been saving for years. Not extravagantly. I wasn't wealthy. But I lived below my means, drove an 8-year-old Honda, and had accumulated enough for a decent down payment on a home of my own. I wanted a small place with a porch. I had saved pictures. That is the embarrassing part. Not because wanting a porch is embarrassing, but because I still remember sitting at my kitchen table scrolling through those pictures while calculating how much of that future I could convert into my parents' emergency. I spoke to a real estate attorney before I did anything. He advised me not to simply start making their mortgage payments. Their finances were too unstable. If I poured money into the existing loan without obtaining an ownership interest, I could spend years saving a property that legally remained exposed to their other debts. The cleanest solution was for me to purchase the house at an independently appraised price. So I did. The appraisal came in at $214,000. There was enough equity to clear the mortgage, settle a few liens, and still leave my parents with a modest amount of cash after closing. I used almost all of my home savings for the down payment. The new mortgage went in my name. The deed went in my name. The title insurance went in my name. My parents signed every document knowingly. There was no secret. After closing, my father hugged me in the parking lot so tightly I could feel his ribs. He whispered, "You saved us." Mom was quieter. On the drive home, she said, "We probably shouldn't discuss all the financial details with people. Your father has his pride." I thought she was protecting him. That interpretation lasted about 6 weeks. Soon, when relatives asked how they had survived the financial crisis, Mom said they had reorganized some things. Later, the story became that the family had worked together. By Christmas, I heard her tell a neighbor that Dad's old business had finally paid out enough money to straighten everything up. I was standing 10 feet away. She knew I heard her. She just kept talking. At the time, I told myself it wasn't worth embarrassing my parents by correcting her. That is how erasure works when you cooperate with it. It rarely begins with someone deleting you completely. First, they ask you to be discreet. Then they call discretion kindness. Then they retell the story without you. Eventually, even you start feeling rude for remembering what happened. My parents remained in the house. I never charged rent. We didn't write a formal lease because they were my parents, and I was sent. The kind of daughter who believed paperwork between relatives represented a lack of trust. The mortgage payment came out of my account. Property taxes came out of my account. Homeowners insurance came out of my account. When a storm tore shingles from the back section of the roof, I paid the deductible. When the dishwasher leaked under the kitchen floor, I replaced the damaged flooring. When a maple tree split during a thunderstorm and crushed part of the fence, I hired the tree crew. I continued renting an apartment because buying another home while carrying that mortgage made no financial sense. My parents never asked what that cost me. Worse, I never told them. I had developed a strange pride around being the competent one. If Mom called and said the refrigerator sounded funny, I made the service appointment. If Dad needed help sorting medical paperwork, I organized it. If the insurance renewal increased, I shopped carriers. If Grant needed money for a deposit on another apartment, somehow I was the person he called, even though I was supposedly the cold, practical sibling who cared too much about numbers. And then, there was the money my parents received from selling me the house. A little over $34,000 remained after their debts were cleared. Within 18 months, most of it was gone. Almost $22,000 went into Grant's first serious business venture. He and a friend opened a specialty sandwich kiosk inside an office complex. My mother told everyone her son owned a restaurant. The kiosk closed 11 months later. The partner disappeared. Grant blamed the building's foot traffic. No one in the family ever discussed the lost money again. Grant's failures had a strange privilege. They were always temporary events. My contributions became permanent obligations. That difference took me years to name. There was one person who understood it immediately. My father's mother, Beatrice Langford, moved into the downstairs guest room about a year after I bought the house. Everyone called her Bea. She was 80 by then, tiny, stubborn, and incapable of pretending to enjoy people she disliked. She had worked as a school secretary for 37 years and still corrected people's grammar in sympathy cards. She also saw everything. Bea contributed almost nothing financially because she had almost nothing. But every few months, I would find a folded $20 bill in my coat pocket after visiting. Once she mailed me $40 with a note that said, "For whichever appliance your parents have murdered this month." I called her and protested. She said, "Don't turn my money into a referendum. Buy yourself lunch." It was never about the amount. It was about being witnessed. Behind the house, Bea grew rosemary in a raised wooden box because she claimed store-bought herbs tasted like green paper. On warm evenings, she sat outside with iced tea and made me sit beside her. One night, Mom was inside praising Grant on the phone because he had agreed to drive Dad to a cardiology appointment. I had driven Dad to the previous 7. Bea listened through the open screen door. Then she looked at me. "You know the difference between having a place in a family and having a position in one." I laughed. "No. A place is yours when you arrive empty-handed. A position depends on what you keep doing." I told her she was being dramatic. She shrugged. "Maybe, but you're going to get tired one day, Tess." I remember looking at her rosemary and saying, "They're my parents. I know who they are." That sounded ominous. It wasn't meant to. She took a sip of tea. Then she said something I spent years trying not to remember. "Just make sure they love you when you're not solving anything." Bea died 3 years later. She was 83. She had a stroke in that downstairs room and never really woke up afterward. At the funeral, Grant gave a beautiful speech. He was genuinely good at that sort of thing. He talked about how Bea taught him to play gin rummy and used to sneak him candy when Mom said no. He told a story about her threatening a parking officer with an umbrella when he was 10. People laughed. Then people cried. I cried too. I loved my brother in that moment. That is important. Nothing that happened later turned every earlier feeling into a lie. Families are harder than that. After the service, Mom stood beside Grant while relatives complimented his speech. My Aunt Marjorie kissed his cheek and said, "Bea adored that boy." I had paid the funeral home. I had arranged the hospice transfer. I had spent the last 6 weeks of Bea's life sleeping on my parents' couch 3 nights a week because Mom said she was exhausted. But I did not want applause for those things. At least, that is what I told myself. What I wanted was smaller and more dangerous. I wanted someone to notice without being asked. After Bea died, I started noticing my own life with uncomfortable clarity. I was 35. I had never owned a home I lived in. I was still in a 2-bedroom rental with beige walls because one room served as my home office. I had postponed 2 vacations. I had declined a job opportunity in Nashville because it would have meant moving farther from my parents. I knew the serial number on their water heater, but had forgotten to renew my own passport. And whenever I imagined changing any of it, guilt arrived before the idea had finished forming. I was not trapped by a contract. I was trapped by identity. Reliable daughter. Practical daughter. Daughter who doesn't make things harder. Daughter who understands. I began paying extra on the mortgage. I told myself I wanted the financial freedom. But secretly, I had another fantasy. I imagined paying the house off early and telling my parents at some big family gathering. Not to humiliate them. Not even to expose everything I had done. I imagined saying, "The house is completely paid for now. You never have to worry about losing it again." And in my fantasy, my mother would finally look at me in front of everyone and say, "Tessa did this for us." That was all. One sentence. I spent almost 9 years buying a sentence. The trouble started the winter before my parents' 42nd anniversary. Dad mentioned Will's over Sunday dinner. Nothing unusual. He was 68. Mom was 66. Several people they knew had been sick recently. Then Mom said, casually, "We've been thinking about keeping the house in the family." I was cutting green beans. It is in the family. Yes, but long term. She glanced toward Grant. He was concentrating very hard on buttering a dinner roll. Mom continued, "Your brother doesn't have the security you have." Grant had changed jobs 3 times in 2 years. At that moment, he was selling high-end home gym equipment on commission. "He's talented," she said, "but not everyone has your kind of career." What exactly are you asking? Mom gave me the smile she used whenever she wanted something to sound smaller than it was. "Nothing today. We're just thinking." Dad cleared his throat. "We don't need to get into all that over dinner." That meant yes, they had been discussing something. I asked whether they expected me to add Grant to the title. Mom's eyes widened as if I had introduced the vulgar subject. "No one said that." "You've asked before." 3 years earlier, she had suggested putting his name on the deed because he was the one most likely to raise a family nearby. I had refused. My answer had not been emotional. I had simply said ownership came with legal and financial consequences, and I was not giving away part of a house I had purchased. Mom sulked for a week. Then everyone pretended the conversation never happened. This time, she reached across the table and touched my wrist. Your father and I are having the anniversary celebration in August. We're inviting everybody. I want you there early. Why? Because we have something meaningful planned. Dad suddenly became fascinated with his iced tea. Grant smiled. I felt the first small warning in my body. Not a thought. A sensation. Cold under my ribs. By March, I had made the last mortgage payment. I had pushed so much extra money toward the principal that I finished years early. The confirmation arrived electronically at 7:14 on a Wednesday morning. Paid in full. I stared at those words at my kitchen counter while my coffee went cold. Then I cried. Not dramatically. Just quiet tears I wiped away with a paper towel because I had a video conference starting in 12 minutes. That evening, I bought a bottle of sparkling cider, ordered Thai food, and toasted myself alone. My phone lit up during dinner with messages from the family group chat. Grant had signed up for an online course about launching a personal brand consulting business. Mom wrote, "So proud of you for always moving forward." I actually laughed. Then I opened the mortgage confirmation again. For the first time, the absurdity was starting to become visible. A month later, the air conditioning system at Willow Creek stopped cooling properly. A contractor found a failing compressor and estimated a little over $6,000 for replacement. I drove to my parents' house after work and explained the options. Mom sighed. Tessa, can we please have one evening where everything isn't about expenses? I looked at her. I thought I had misunderstood. The air conditioner needs replacing. I know. You always make everything sound like a business meeting. I'm telling you because I'm paying for it. Her face tightened. See, there that. What? The way you always have to mention what you pay for. Something in me moved. Not enough. But something. 20 minutes later, Grant arrived carrying 2 boxes of gourmet cupcakes from a bakery near his office. My mother lit up. So my God, look W. Hat your brother brought. We had extras from a client thing, he said. She took pictures of the cupcakes. She took a picture of Grant holding the cupcakes. She posted both in the family chat. Grant knows how to make an ordinary Sunday special. I sat at the table with a $6,180 HVAC estimate folded inside my purse. For the first time, I did not feel hurt. I felt curious. It was almost clinical. I watched Mom praise him for carrying free cupcakes into a house I had spent almost a decade financially supporting, and I thought, what would happen if I made her acknowledge the difference? After dinner, I tried. Mom and I were alone in the kitchen. Dad and Grant were watching basketball. I said, "Can I ask you something without you getting defensive?" That is never a promising beginning. I need to know whether you actually understand how much I've taken care of here. Her expression changed immediately. I almost retreated. Instead, I continued. I'm not asking for money. I'm not asking you to repay me. I just want to know if you see it. Tessa, please, just answer. She turned away and started putting leftovers into containers. I could hear my own pulse. Who made it possible for you and Dad to stay in this house? She pushed a lid onto a plastic container harder than necessary. We all made sacrifices. I'm asking a specific question, and I don't like where this is going. Why? Because you turn everything into accounting. I almost apologized. I actually inhaled to apologize. Then she looked directly at me and said, "Your brother has given this family something you never have." The sentence surprised me enough that I laughed once. What? He brings people together. He brings warmth. He shows up because he wants to, not because he wants a receipt. I stared at her. She kept going. Money isn't everything, Tessa. The cruelty wasn't loud. That was why it got through. I drove home, barely remembering the streets. At a red light, I realized my jaw hurt from clenching it. I told myself Mom had been embarrassed. I told myself I had cornered her. I told myself people say unfair things when they feel ashamed. By the time I reached my apartment, I had explained her behavior so thoroughly that I almost felt guilty for asking the question. The next Sunday, I did not go to dinner. I told everyone I had a headache. That was a lie. The truth was I could not sit across from my mother and pretend nothing had happened. Around 5, Dad texted me. Feeling better. I typed, not really. Then I opened the utility app and paid the quarterly water bill for Willow Creek because I had forgotten to transfer it from my account years earlier. That moment embarrasses me more than the confrontation. Not because paying the bill was foolish. Because I did it while crying. I had just been told that the things I did not count, and my first instinct was to make sure the people who said it did not experience inconvenience. My closest friend, Sienna Brooks, came over 2 nights later. Sienna works as a respiratory therapist and has the unnerving ability to remain silent until you say the thing you were trying not to say. I told her everything. She asked, "What are you afraid would happen if you stopped taking care of them?" They de-struggle. That's the practical answer. I looked at her. She waited. Finally, I said, "My mother would say I was selfish." And I hated how quickly the next answer came. I might believe her. Sienna nodded. There it was. The whole trap. Not money. Not the house. My mother had become the voice that decided whether I was good. 2 weeks later, I found the first piece of the plan. Mom had called because their printer would not connect to the Wi-Fi. I stopped after work. She and Dad were at a neighborhood association dinner, so I let myself in with my key. The printer problem took 5 minutes. While testing it, a page from the print queue suddenly came through. It was an appointment confirmation from an estate planning firm called Holloway and Finch. Paul and Diane Langford. Consultation completed. Follow-up document execution, meeting scheduled. I stood there holding the page. My parents had very few assets. Dad had a 10-year-old pickup. Mom had a small retirement account from the bridal shop. The house was mine. So what documents were they executing? I put the page beside the printer. When Mom called later and asked whether I fixed it, I said yes. She thanked me. I asked whether she and Dad were updating their wills. There was a small pause. Just routine things. Anything involving the house. Another pause. You worry too much. Then she changed the subject. 3 days later, Aunt Marjorie had a birthday dinner. I went because I wanted to behave normally until I understood what was happening. After dessert, Mom and Marjorie started talking about their own mother, who had died when I was in college. I had heard pieces of that family history before, but never the whole thing. My mother had spent almost a decade helping care for her parents. She drove them to appointments, managed medications, cooked, cleaned, balanced bills. Her older brother lived 2 states away and visited a few times a year. When their father died, the family business, a small neighborhood hardware store, went almost entirely to the brother because their father believed a son carries the name. Mom said this without looking at me. Her voice had none of its usual polish. I worked there from the time I was 14, she said. I took care of both of them. Then he came home for the funeral and became the important one. Marjorie sighed. That generation was different. Mom folded her napkin. Different is one word for it. For one strange second, I felt close to her. I finally understood part of the machinery. My mother had been taught that daughters served and sons inherited. She knew exactly how invisibility felt. And somehow, instead of breaking the pattern, she had built her adult life around making sure her son stood on the winning side of it. That realization made me sadder than anger would have. It also made what happened next impossible to excuse. The following Tuesday, I went to Willow Creek to pick up some insurance papers Dad wanted me to review. No one was home. Dad had told me the documents were in the cabinet beside his desk. I opened the cabinet. The insurance envelope was on the top shelf. Underneath it sat a dark green accordion file. A white label on the tab read Family Continuity. I stared at it for maybe 15 seconds. Then I opened it. I am not proud of invading their privacy. I am also not going to pretend I regret it. The first pages were ordinary estate planning documents, medical directives, power of attorney drafts, beneficiary notes. Then I found a prepared deed. My name appeared first. Tessa Langford, current owner. The document would transfer the property to Paul and Diane Langford. Behind it was a draft amendment instructing that, after their deaths, the property would pass to Grant. I read both documents twice. Then I found an email printout. My mother had written to the attorney's office. The anniversary gathering would provide the best opportunity, she said, because I would not want to upset my father in front of relatives. She asked whether someone could be present to notarize my signature immediately. The attorney's response was cautious. He said I should receive independent legal advice and sign voluntarily. Mom had written a note in the margin. She hates scenes. Once everyone is watching, she'll cooperate. I sat down in my father's desk chair. My hands became cold. There are betrayals that arrive like explosions. This one felt more like discovering that a door you had used every day opened into a different building than you thought. My parents were not hoping I would eventually give Grant the house. They were designing a situation where refusing would become socially expensive. They knew me. They knew exactly which lever to pull. Public embarrassment, Dad's health, family expectations, the fear of being called selfish. They were using the architecture of my personality against me. I photographed every relevant page. Then I found the attorney's engagement letter. Mom had paid a $2,400 retainer. I sat there staring at that amount. 3 weeks earlier, she had complained that they could not possibly contribute toward the new air conditioner. Yet they had found thousands of dollars to create documents designed to remove my ownership. The final injury was a signature. Dad S. He had signed the engagement agreement, too. My father, who avoided conflict. My father, who texted me about weather instead of feelings. My father, who had whispered that I saved them after the closing 9 years earlier. He knew. I put everything back exactly where I found it. Then I took the insurance papers and left. I made it to my car before I started shaking. I called Sienna. She answered on the second ring. I found something. What? I think my parents are planning to pressure me into signing the house over to them at their anniversary party. There was silence. Then she said, "Do you want me to come over?" Yes. That was all. No lecture. No dramatic reaction. No demand that I immediately become stronger than I felt. She brought dinner. I barely ate. The next morning, I called an attorney. Martin Cho practiced real estate law and had been recommended by someone at work. His office was above a bakery downtown, and the waiting room smelled faintly like cinnamon. I brought the original purchase contract, closing statement, recorded deed, mortgage satisfaction, tax records, insurance documents, and the photographs from my parents' file. Martin reviewed everything without interrupting. Then he said, "You own the property." I know. I'm saying it because you look like you need to hear someone say it. I stared at him. He continued. The transaction 9 years ago appears legitimate. Independent appraisal, recorded transfer, consideration paid, mortgage solely in your name. No indication your parents retained an ownership interest. What if they claim I only bought it for them? They can claim many things. Could they win? Based on what you've shown me, I would consider that unlikely. Then he explained the more practical problem. Even weak claims could create delays, legal fees, and complications if my parents decided to fight after realizing I would not sign voluntarily. "Are you planning to keep the property?" he asked. Until that second, I had assumed yes. The house was part of my mental map of the future. Even if my parents eventually moved, I had imagined keeping it. Maybe renting it. Maybe living there later. Maybe letting Grant buy it someday if he became financially stable. But suddenly, the question sounded different. Did I want the property? Or did I want the years I had invested in it to mean something? I don't know, I said. Martin leaned back. Then don't make a decision today. But understand this. Ownership gives you options. Guilt is not a lien. I remembered that sentence. I did not make the decision that day. I gave my parents one final opportunity. The next Sunday, I went to dinner. Grant spent 10 minutes talking about a new partnership he was considering. Mom listened like he was briefing investors. When the conversation slowed, I asked, "Can I ask you and Dad something about the house?" Dad stopped chewing. Mom's eyes sharpened. "If I ever decided I needed to sell it, what would you do?" Mom laughed. Not because it was funny. Because the question offended her. "Why would you sell our home?" I said, "It's a hypothetical. There are some things you don't treat like investments." I bought it. That isn't what I mean. Then what do you mean? She set down her fork. I mean you stepped in when we needed help. That doesn't make the house some personal asset you can cash out whenever you feel like it. I looked at Dad. He said nothing. Grant looked from Mom to me. This got intense fast. I asked her, "So whose house do you think it is?" Mom stared straight at me. Morally. Yes. The family's. And legally. She waved one hand. Legal paperwork isn't the same as what's right. I felt strangely calm. Who is the family? That's a ridiculous question. Would Grant be included? Of course. Would I? Her face changed. She knew. I knew. Dad knew. No one answered. That was the moment the house stopped being a home in my mind. I finished dinner. I helped clear the table. Then I drove home and called Kelly Donahue, a commercial real estate agent I knew through work. "I need to sell a house quietly," I told her. "How quietly?" "Until closing." There was another pause. "Occupied." "Yes." "Complicated." "Yes." "Legal complication or family complication." "Mostly family." Kelly sighed. "Those are usually worse." She knew a local investor named Caleb Foster who bought older homes, renovated them, and kept many as long-term rentals. He had cash available and did not require traditional financing. The challenge was inspection. My parents solved that without knowing it. The following weekend, they traveled to Cincinnati for a cousin's retirement celebration. I let Kelly and Caleb into the house Saturday morning. Walking through Willow Creek with a potential buyer was one of the hardest things I have ever done. Not because I suddenly wanted to keep the property. Because memories are manipulative. There was the narrow doorway where Dad marked our heights in pencil. The living room corner where Mom used to put the Christmas tree. A pale ring on the basement floor where my childhood dog's water bowl had sat. The crack beside the kitchen window, Bea claimed, looked like Abraham Lincoln. Her room still smelled faintly of the lavender powder she used. Behind the house, the rosemary had grown woody and huge. I stood beside it while Kelly and Caleb measured the back patio. For several minutes, I nearly stopped everything. I thought, maybe I can keep the house and just set better boundaries. Then I looked at the photograph on my phone. She hates scenes. Once everyone is watching, she'll cooperate. I understood something important. Keeping the house would keep a permanent doorway between us. Every repair would be a negotiation. Every bill would be a reminder. Every future decision would reopen the question of who the property truly belonged to. I had spent 9 years trying to make my sacrifice visible. Maybe freedom required accepting that they might never see it. Caleb offered $337,500 as is. The increase in value stunned me. I asked for 48 hours. That evening, Sienna sat across from me at a diner while I sent Art at the unsigned offer. "If you sell," she said, "are you doing it to punish them?" "I don't know." "Figure that out." I hated her for about 10 seconds. Then I knew she was right. Revenge would feel good for an afternoon. I needed a decision I could live with after the anger burned out. So I wrote down what I wanted. I wanted my parents housed safely. I wanted their daily lives not to collapse because of my decision. I wanted no financial entanglement afterward. I wanted Grant to have the opportunity everyone insisted he deserved. And I wanted the legal relationship between me and Willow Creek to end completely. The next morning, I called Kelly. "I'll accept, but I need conditions." Caleb agreed to allow my parents to remain for 75 days after closing without rent while they relocated. I paid the deposit on a clean 2-bedroom apartment in a quiet complex 15 minutes from Grant. First-floor unit. Wide bathroom doorway, because Dad sometimes used a cane. Grocery store nearby. The lease could transfer directly to my parents. I also prepaid a moving company for 1 day. Sienna stared at me when I told her. "You're still paying for their move." "Yes." "Why?" "Because I don't want their cruelty deciding mine." That answer surprised me. It was the first boundary I had ever created that did not require someone else to be the villain. I could protect myself without becoming careless about what happened to them. That distinction mattered. I signed the purchase agreement. Closing was scheduled for the Wednesday before the anniversary party. For 3 weeks, I lived inside 2 realities. My mother called about flowers. Dad texted me baseball scores. Grant asked whether I could review a financing proposal for him. Meanwhile, inspectors visited Willow Creek while my parents were out. Title work moved forward. My lawyer prepared occupancy documents. I gathered everything I would need after closing. The secrecy made me nauseous. Several times I woke at 3 in the morning, convinced I had become the person doing something deceptive. Then I would read Mom's note again. "Once everyone is watching, she'll cooperate." There was a difference between privacy and manipulation. They were arranging an audience to eliminate my ability to refuse. I was arranging my exit before they could interfere with it. Still, I did not feel triumphant. Mostly, I felt grief. 12 days before closing, Grant appeared at my apartment unexpectedly. He carried iced coffees and announced that he had been nearby. Grant had never been nearby in 9 years. We talked for 15 minutes before the reason emerged. He needed $4,500. He had an opportunity to purchase discounted inventory from a gym equipment distributor. He would repay me within 2 months. "I'm not lending you money," I said. He smiled. "Come on, Tess." "No." His expression changed in a tiny, fascinating way. It's not anger. Confusion. "Are you serious?" "Yes." "Since when?" That question told me more than he intended. "Since now." He leaned back against the counter. "Is this about Mom?" "No." "It feels like something S going on with you." "I'm changing some things." "Like what?" "Like saying no before I resent people." Grant gave a nervous laugh. "It's okay. Therapy vocabulary." "I'm not in therapy." "You should be." "So should you." For a second, we both laughed. Then he looked hurt, and my old reflex immediately activated. I wanted to soften the refusal. "Offer half." "Explain my budget." "Promise later." Instead, I let the silence exist. Grant recovered. "Well, if you change your mind, let me know." "I won't." At the door, he hugged me. I hugged him back. That surprised both of us. After he left, I cried for almost an hour. Not because I had refused him, because I realized how simple the word had been. No lightning. No collapse. No police at the door. No emergency. Just disappointment. I had spent years treating other people's disappointment as evidence that I had done something wrong. Closing happened at 10:30 on Wednesday morning. The title office was aggressively ordinary. Gray carpet. Plastic plant. Coffee machine making noises like an exhausted animal. I signed documents for 40 minutes. When the final transfer confirmation appeared, Kelly squeezed my shoulder. "That's it." I expected relief. Instead, I stared at the pen in my hand. The house was no longer mine. 9 years of mortgage statements, contractors, tax notices, emergency calls, and quiet transfers had ended with a signature beneath fluorescent lights. The money hit escrow. Caleb became the legal owner. My parents continued living there under the temporary occupancy agreement. They had no idea. I drove home afterward and sat in my car for 20 minutes. Then I went back to Willow Creek while they were at a medical appointment. I took only one thing: a rosemary cutting from Bee's garden. I wrapped the roots in damp paper and put it in a flower pot on my passenger floor. I left everything else: the height marks, the Christmas ornaments, the old photograph albums, the ceramic bowl Bee hated, the hallway photographs where Grant occupied most of the wall and my college graduation remained behind the angel. I finally understood I did not need to rescue evidence of my childhood. It had happened. That was enough. Friday evening, Mom called. "You're still coming early tomorrow?" "Yes." "Wear something pretty." "I will." Her voice became almost girlish. "We have a surprise." My stomach clenched. "I figured." She laughed, misunderstanding me. Saturday afternoon, I arrived at Willow Creek carrying a brown leather tote. Inside were 3 envelopes. One contained formal notice explaining the change in ownership and the 75-day occupancy agreement. The second contained the apartment information, prepaid deposit, first month's rent, and moving company confirmation. The third contained copies of the recorded sale and the earlier deed showing when I purchased the home from my parents. I considered bringing every financial record. I had them. 9 years of payments. Insurance. Taxes. Repairs. HVAC. Roof. Plumbing. Electrical work. Thousands of dollars, documented down to the cent. The night before the party, I spread the records across my dining table. For years, I had believed facts could force recognition. I had built an imaginary courtroom where, if I produced enough evidence, my mother would finally say, "You mattered. You carried us." But evidence cannot make someone value what they are committed to minimizing. I packed the 3 necessary envelopes. I left the ledger at home. The party began at 4. Mom had transformed the house. Hydrangeas. Candles. A photo display documenting 42 years of marriage. A catered buffet. A white cake with silver lettering. Relatives from 3 states. Neighbors. Church friends. Former customers from Dad's upholstery business. Grant circulated through the rooms pouring wine and making people laugh. He was wearing a navy jacket and looked handsome. I watched my mother watching him. Pure pride. Not manufactured. Not fake. That was another truth I had to accept. She genuinely loved him. Her failure was not loving him too much. It was believing love required, arranging the family around him. Dad approached me near the kitchen. "You okay?" "Sure." "You look pale." "A long week." He nodded. For half a second, I wondered whether he might warn me. He knew what was coming. I knew he knew. He glanced toward Mom. Then he said, "Your aunt brought that dip you like," and walked away. That was my father in one moment. He could recognize danger. He could feel guilt. He could almost choose courage. Almost. Around 6, Mom tapped her glass. People gathered. She gave a lovely speech about marriage. She talked about difficult years, Dad's illness, raising children, keeping traditions alive. She said families survived because people stayed loyal when life became inconvenient. The irony was so complete that I nearly smiled. Then she looked toward me. "Tessa, come here." The room shifted. I walked forward. Mom kissed my cheek. She was trembling slightly. Whether from excitement or nerves, I couldn't tell. "We have something special for our children," she said. Children. Plural. Grant moved closer. Mom produced the green folder. My pulse slowed. That surprised me. For weeks, I had imagined panic. Instead, I felt extremely present. She explained that she and Dad had been thinking about what would happen to the family home when they were gone. She said Willow Creek represented more than bricks. It represented roots, memories, belonging. Then she said they had created a plan that would put everything back where it naturally belonged. That wording almost made me lose my composure. Back, as though my ownership had been a temporary clerical error. She opened the folder and removed the deed. This just makes your father and me the owners again, so the house can eventually pass properly within the family. Several relatives nodded. No one understood what they were witnessing. Mom turned toward the woman with the leather case. And Denise has kindly agreed to notarize everything for us tonight. The woman stood. My Aunt Marjorie clasped her hands. Oh, how wonderful. Someone began filming. Mom placed the document on the dining table. A pen rested beside it. Grant said, "Wow, okay, big family moment." I looked at him. For the first time, I wondered whether he truly knew. His expression looked surprised. Not innocent exactly, but surprised. Mom touched my back. Just sign where the tabs are. I picked up the deed. I read the first page slowly. The room became restless. Mom whispered, "Honey, everybody's waiting." I looked at her. What exactly are you asking me to give why? Though. Her smile tightened. We just explained. No, you described the reason. I'm asking what the document does. A few conversations stopped completely. Dad stared at the floor. Mom lowered her voice. Tessa, please don't turn this into one of your work things. It transfers the entire property from me to you and Dad. It returns the house to the family. So you agree that I currently own it? Her face changed. Only slightly. But I saw it. Tessa, do you? The room had become very quiet. Grant stepped forward. Wait, you own the house. Mom turned sharply. Grant, not now. His eyebrows went up. I looked at him. You didn't know. Know what? That answer changed something. Not enough to repair our relationship, but enough to reorganize the blame. Mom interrupted. We are not doing this. I said, you invited a notary and 27 witnesses. I think we are. Aunt Marjorie whispered, Diane, what is she talking about? Mom's composure fractured. It's complicated. It isn't, I said. Then I placed the unsigned deed back on the table. 9 years ago, Mom and Dad were close to foreclosure after Dad became ill and the business failed. I bought this house from them through a normal closing at the appraised value. I used my savings for the down payment and took the mortgage in my name. Dad closed his eyes. I continued. They received the equity from the sale. They remained here without paying rent. I paid the mortgage, property taxes, insurance, and major repairs. Grant looked at Dad. Is that true? Dad nodded once. My brother's face drained. Mom said, You're making us sound like parasites. I'm describing the arrangement. You offered. I did. So why are you humiliating us now? I almost answered emotionally. Then I remembered all the years I had explained myself. I didn't need to. I'm not the person who invited the audience. That landed. Mom stared at me. I continued. You planned to put this document in front of me here because you believed I would be too embarrassed to say no in public. Her face went completely still. Dad looked at her. Aunt Marjorie said, "Diane." I reached into my tote. I know because I saw the correspondence with the estate attorney. Now Dad looked at me. Mom's voice dropped. You went through our private papers. Yes. You had no right. That part is fair. I shouldn't have gone through them. She seemed almost energized by the admission. Exactly. But finding them prevented me from signing away a house I owned because my parents engineered a public confrontation. The advantage disappeared. Grant looked between us. Hold on, this was supposed to go to me. Mom said, eventually. He stared at the deed. You told me there was going to be some kind of family announcement. You didn't tell me Tess had to give you the house first. Grant, please. No, that's a pretty important detail. For one moment, I saw the boy he had once been instead of the man everyone had trained him to become. Confused. Entitled, yes. But also shaped by information other people controlled. Mom turned toward me again. All right, you've made your point. We'll discuss it privately later. There won't be a later discussion about the deed. Her mouth tightened. Then don't sign it tonight. I can't. You mean you won't? No, I mean I can't. That was when I opened the first envelope. The property was sold on Wednesday. No one reacted immediately. The sentence seemed too ordinary to process. Dad was the first. His head lifted. What? I sold Willow Creek. Mom laughed once. A sharp, disbelieving sound. No, you didn't. I placed the recorded transfer on the table. The closing was Wednesday morning. Dad stepped forward and stared at the paperwork. Grant whispered, Jesus. Mom did not look down. She looked only at me. You sold our house. I sold my house. Her face crumpled and hardened at the same time. You did this behind our backs. Yes. How could you? The question almost broke me. Not because I doubted the decision. Because somewhere inside me lived a 30-year-old reflex that still wanted to reassure my mother when she looked wounded. I forced myself to stay where I was. You were planning to use this party to make me surrender it. That is not the same thing. No, it is. I put the second envelope down. You have 75 days before you have to leave. The new owner agreed in writing that you can stay during that period without paying rent. Mom stared. I also found a 2-bedroom apartment nearby. The deposit and first month are paid. It is on the first floor for Dad. You don't have to take it, but it's available. Dad sank into a dining chair. I placed the third envelope beside him. The movers are prepaid too. Mom's eyes filled. For a moment, I thought she might finally understand. Then she said, You planned all of this while. Smiling in my face. I nodded. Yes. You're cruel. That word hurt. It still hurts when I remember it. But pain is not proof. I spent 3 weeks making sure you would not be homeless. You took our home. I stopped financing a family system that required me to own something only until Grant needed it. Grant flinched. Mom pointed at him. Your brother would never do this to us. There it was. The sentence had changed clothes, but it was the same old hierarchy. Your brother. The generous one. The loving one. The real family person. Something inside me finally stopped auditioning. I looked at Grant, then at Mom. Good, I said. Then now he gets the chance to help. Grant's head snapped toward me. Mom stared like I had slapped her. You resent him. I resented being compared to him, while paying for the life that made your comparisons possible. That's not love. No, it was. Silence. Then I said the sentence I had needed years to understand. Love that requires me to keep providing access to my money, time, property, and obedience isn't the kind of love I can live inside anymore. Dad whispered my name. I looked at him. He seemed 20 years older. Tess, your mother thought. No. I did not raise my voice. But he stopped. You signed the lawyer's agreement, too. He looked stunned. Mom turned toward him. Grant said, Dad. My father rubbed both hands over his face. Then he admitted it. I knew about the paperwork. The room seemed to shrink. He looked at me. I told your mother I didn't think doing it at the party was a good idea. There it was. His defense. Not that he refused. Not that he protected me. He merely predicted consequences. I felt the last, soft version of my father disappear. For years, I had cast him as the harmless one. Mom dominated. Dad avoided conflict. Therefore, Mom was responsible and Dad was trapped. But passivity can protect the person doing harm. Silence can become cooperation when it repeatedly benefits the silent person. You thought it might hurt me, I asked. He swallowed. Yes. And you signed anyway. I didn't think it would go this far. I nodded. That's the problem, Dad. You always waited to see how far Mom would go before deciding whether you needed to become involved. His eyes filled with tears. I wanted to comfort him. That instinct arrived immediately. I did not obey it. Instead, I picked up my tote. Mom said, if you walk out that door after doing this, don't expect this family to welcome you back. For years, that threat would have destroyed me. Now I heard the condition inside it. Come back only if you return to your old position. I looked around the room. At relatives trying not to stare. At Grant looking sick. At the cake no one had cut. At the hallway full of photographs. At the people who had known me all my life and still did not know the most basic fact about who had owned the house beneath their feet. I'm not asking to be welcomed back into the same role. Then I left. Dad followed me onto the porch. The evening was humid. Bee's rosemary moved slightly in the breeze. He stood behind me, while I searched for my keys. Tessa. I turned. He looked defeated. I'm sorry. The words were almost enough. That is the terrible thing about loving someone. Sometimes the smallest offering reaches the hungriest part of you. I wanted to accept it immediately. I wanted to say, I know, Dad, it's okay. Instead, I asked, what are you sorry for? He stared at me. That question was harder than forgiveness. Finally, he said, for letting it happen. I waited. And for signing. I nodded. Thank you. Can we fix this? I don't know. That was the truth. He looked toward the house. What are we supposed to do? The old Tessa heard the question as an assignment. Find apartment. Make budget. Call movers. Fix problem. I said, everything you need for the next 75 days is in the envelopes. He looked back at me. And after that, you and Mom figure out your life. I watched the words hit him. Not because they were cruel. Because no one had heard me say them before. Then I got into my car. I made it 3 blocks before the shaking started. By the time I reached a gas station, I had to pull over. I cried so hard my chest hurt. I cried for the house. For B. For my father. For the mother I wished I had. For the brother I blamed for benefits he had been trained to expect. For the years I had voluntarily given, and the years I had secretly treated as proof that I deserved love. Relief did not feel clean. It came tangled with grief, guilt, anger, and something that felt almost like withdrawal. Sienna came to my apartment that night. She found me sitting on the kitchen floor. I feel horrible, I told her. Okay. What if that means I did something horrible? It doesn't. How do you know? Because feelings aren't verdicts. I laughed through tears. You've been waiting years to say that. Probably. The next 75 days were ugly. Grant started the family narrative before Mom did. 2 days after the party, he posted online about our parents being forced from the home they built their entire lives around. He did not name me. He did not need to. Several cousins contacted me. One called me heartless. One asked for my side. I sent no public response. Then Aunt Marjorie called. She was furious. How could you let your parents find out at a party? I almost laughed. They invited the notary. That doesn't mean you had to humiliate them. I didn't organize the audience. You could have warned them about the sale. They could have warned me about the deed. Silence. Marjorie changed tactics. Your mother is devastated. I believe you. She says she can't sleep. I'm sorry she's hurting. That's all you have to say. Yes. My aunt sounded genuinely confused. The family was discovering a problem none of us had anticipated. I would no longer argue. They knew how to fight with defensive Tessa. They knew how to fight with guilty Tessa. They knew how to fight with explaining Tessa, fixing Tessa, begging to be understood Tessa. They had no script for a woman who said, I understand that you disagree, and stopped talking. A week later, Grant came to my apartment. This time he brought nothing. He stood in the hallway with his hands in his pockets. "Can I come in?" I hesitated, then stepped aside. He sat on my couch. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, he said, "Mom says you've always hated me." "I haven't. She says this was about the house going to me." "That was part of it." "So you did resent me?" "Yes." He looked hurt. I continued before he could turn that hurt into innocence. "But resentment isn't the same as hatred." "What did I do?" I looked at my brother. The easiest answer would have been everything. The more accurate answer was harder. You accepted a system that benefited you. I didn't know about the house. I believe you. His face changed. You do. Yes. Then why are you angry at me? Because you knew other things. He frowned. You knew Mom and Dad constantly called me for money. That's between you guys. You borrowed from me. I paid you back. Sometimes. He looked away. I continued. You knew Mom praised you for things she expected from me without comment. You knew she used me as the emergency plan. You knew you could arrive at the last minute and become the hero after I spent days fixing something. What was I supposed to do? Tell her not to love me? No, you could have noticed me. That stopped him. I had not planned to say it. The words came out quietly. Grant rubbed his palms together. After a long time, he said, "I thought you liked being the responsible one." So did I. That was probably the most honest thing either of us had ever said to the other. Grant did help our parents after the move. At first, he announced to several relatives that Mom and Dad would never need anything because he would handle it. He helped pack. He took Dad to appointments. He paid 1 month of utilities at the new apartment. He assembled their bed. He was proud of himself. Mom was proud of him too. Then responsibility stopped being a performance and became repetition. Groceries every week. Prescription pickup again. Another cardiology appointment. A problem with the cable company. The car repair. Rent. Forms. Calls. The endless small maintenance of other human lives. Within 2 months, Grant began missing things. Within 3, he stopped promising. Mom complained to Marjorie that he was overwhelmed with work. No one had ever described me as overwhelmed. They had described me as dependable. There is a difference between those words that only the dependable person notices. My parents moved into the apartment before the deadline. Mom called the prepaid move an insult. She used it anyway. Dad sent me one text afterward. "We're settled. Thank you for making sure we had somewhere to go." I stared at it for a long time. Then I wrote, "I'm glad you're safe." That was all. Mom and I went completely no contact for almost 5 months. At first, I checked my phone constantly. Not because I expected kindness. Because my nervous system expected consequences. A furious message. A relative demanding an explanation. Some emergency requiring me to return to my old role. Every silence felt temporary. I started seeing a therapist. Her name was Dr. Rachel Kim, and in our third session, she asked me whether I knew what I wanted from my mother. Accountability. What would that sound like? I answered immediately. She would admit I saved the house. Dr. Kim waited. I frowned. What? Nothing. No, you did the therapist silence. She smiled. Keep going. I realized I was still asking. For recognition. Even after selling the property. Even after leaving. Even after no contact. I was still mentally standing in that kitchen, waiting for Mom to confirm my value. So we worked on something harder than confrontation. We worked on accepting that she might never do it. That was the real separation. Not selling the house. Not walking out of the party. Not blocking her number. The real separation was ending my internal trial. I no longer needed to prove the case. The documents existed. The years existed. I had lived them. Her denial could not retroactively alter reality. My father and I developed a limited relationship. At first, his messages were safe. Storm coming tonight. Your old team won. Saw a dog that looked like Baxter. I answered when I wanted. Sometimes immediately. Sometimes 3 days later. I no longer treated every text as a summons. Eventually, he asked if we could have coffee. I agreed. We met in a diner. He looked smaller than I remembered. He apologized again. This time, when I asked what he was apologizing for, he had an answer. For choosing peace with your mother over fairness to you. I looked at him. He continued. I told myself I was staying out of it. I was. That mattered. It did not repair everything. But it mattered. I asked why he had signed the attorney agreement. He stared at his coffee. Your mother said the house should eventually go to Grant because you didn't need it. I laughed bitterly. I didn't need it because I had spent 9 years supporting it. I know that now. You knew it then. He nodded. Yes. That was the first time he did not hide behind confusion. We did not hug when we left. But I drove home without feeling hollow. Sometimes progress is not reconciliation. Sometimes it is simply telling the truth in a room where nobody is performing. Grant and I speak occasionally. Our relationship is strange. More honest. Less close. He once apologized for assuming I would always help him financially. I asked what made him realize it. He said, Mom asked me for $600 for a car repair, and I caught myself thinking, why does this always become my problem? We both stared at each other. Then Grant laughed. Oh, exactly. He shook his head. I really was an idiot. You were trained. That doesn't completely get me off the hook. No. He nodded. That was enough. Mom remained the hardest part. Around Christmas, she sent a card. No apology. Just a printed message and a handwritten line. We miss the daughter you used to be. I read it 3 times. Then I understood why it bothered me. She did not miss me. She missed access to the version of me who never required reciprocity. I did not respond. In January, she called from a number I did not recognize. I answered. She said, "I think 5 months is long enough." Not hello. Not I'm sorry. Not can we talk. 5 months is long enough. As though my boundary were a punishment whose sentence she could declare completed. I said, long enough for what? This nonsense. What nonsense? Families fight, they move on. I'm willing to talk if we talk honestly. She exhaled. There you go again. Then we're not ready. You sold our home. Yes. You still think you were justified. Yes. What kind of daughter does that? There it was. The old courtroom reopening. But I was no longer the defendant. I'm going to end the call now. Tessa, I hope you're doing okay. Goodbye, Mom. My hands shook afterward. Boundaries did not become easy just because I had used them once. That is something I wish people talked about more. You can know a boundary is necessary and still feel cruel enforcing it. You can miss someone who hurt you. You can love your mother and refuse to be managed by her. You can understand why she became who she became and still decide you will not be collateral damage from her unfinished pain. Compassion does not require access. That distinction changed my life. After taxes, fees, and everything else connected to the sale, I had enough money left to do something I had postponed for nearly a decade. I bought a home. Not an impressive one. A 2-bedroom bungalow on the other side of Lexington with pale siding, an uneven driveway, original hardwood floors, and a kitchen that needed updating. It had a porch. The first time I walked through it, I laughed. All those years, the porch had survived in my imagination. I closed in February. The first thing I brought over was B's rosemary cutting. It had survived months on my apartment windowsill in a chipped blue pot. I planted it beside the back steps. The second thing I brought was a folding chair. I sat in the empty living room eating takeout noodles because I had no table yet. No one needed anything from me. No repair at Willow Creek. No Sunday dinner obligation. No bill to quietly cover. The silence felt wrong. Then tea felt peaceful. Then, slowly, it began to feel like mine. That spring, I hosted dinner. Sienna came early and brought bread. Kelly brought a ridiculous housewarming plant almost as tall as I was. 2 people from work came with their spouses. Grant came alone. I debated inviting him for days. In the end, I realized boundaries were not revenge either. I wanted him there. So I asked. He showed up on time. That might sound insignificant. It was. He brought a pie he had actually purchased specifically for dinner, instead of something left over from somewhere else. When he walked in, he held it out awkwardly. I paid full retail. I laughed. Growth. Don't get used to it. Later, my cousin Paige joined us after her shift at a bookstore. She was 21, quiet, bright, and visibly exhausted in the way young women often are when their families have already decided competence belongs to them. After everyone left, she stayed to help with dishes. We were standing at the sink when she asked, "Can I tell you something?" "Sure." "My mom keeps asking me to take over everything with Grandma because she says I'm better at it than my brothers." I dried a plate. "What do you think?" "I think she's right." That wasn't my question. Paige looked at me. I continued. "Do you want to take over everything?" Her eyes filled immediately. "No." "Then that matters." "But somebody has to help." "Yes." "What if my brothers do?" "Then your family has a problem." She frowned. "That sounds cold." It sounded cold to me too, the first time someone said it. We went outside. The rosemary beside the steps had survived the transplant. I rubbed one leaf between my fingers. Bee's voice came back to me, not word for word, but in meaning. "Make sure they love you when you aren't solving anything." I told Paige, "You can help people without volunteering to disappear inside their needs." She was quiet. I continued. "Being capable doesn't automatically make you responsible for everyone who refuses to become capable." She nodded slowly. "Did you know that before everything happened with your parents?" "No." "How did you learn?" "The expensive way." She laughed. So did I. Then she asked the question I still ask myself sometimes. "Do you regret selling the house?" I looked through the kitchen window at the people still talking inside. Grant had stayed to help Sienna move chairs. Kelly was laughing at something near the counter. My home was full of people who knew the story. Not because I had forced them to study evidence. Because they had listened when I spoke. "No," I said. "I regret that selling it became necessary." That is still the most accurate answer. I do not celebrate losing Willow Creek. I loved that house. I loved Christmas mornings there. I loved Bee's room. I loved Dad's workshop corner in the garage. I loved the kitchen before the kitchen became a place where I had to defend the existence of my own contribution. Leaving something does not require pretending it contained nothing beautiful. Sometimes you leave precisely because the beautiful parts kept persuading you to tolerate the destructive ones. Mom and I still do not have a normal relationship. There have been a few messages. One short phone call after Dad had another cardiac procedure. A birthday card. A voicemail she deleted and replaced with another voicemail saying only, "Call me when you want." I do not know whether we will reconcile. I know what reconciliation would require. It's not groveling. Not public humiliation. Not repayment. Just reality. I will not build a relationship inside a story where I betrayed my parents by taking away something that belonged to them. I am willing to discuss what I could have handled differently. I am willing to admit secrecy had consequences. I am willing to hear that the party devastated her. But I will not apologize for refusing to sign away my property. I will not apologize for selling it. And I will never again purchase belonging with usefulness. The strangest part is that I no longer hate Grant. For a while, I thought I should. He was the golden child. He benefited. He accepted things. He let Mom praise him while I carried the practical load. But families like ours damage the favored child too. Grant spent decades being rewarded for promise instead of discipline. He learned that charm could delay consequences. He entered his 30s without basic confidence that he could manage ordinary responsibility because somebody had always softened the landing. I was trained to overfunction. He was trained to underfunction. Different cages. Same builder. The difference is that, eventually, each of us has to decide whether we keep living inside the role. Grant is learning. Slowly. So am I. Dad is learning the cost of silence. Mom may never decide to learn anything. That belongs to her. My job is no longer to carry the lesson to her due. Or, sometimes, on Sunday mornings, I make coffee and sit on my porch. I used to feel guilty around noon because I knew Mom would be preparing dinner. Now Sunday belongs to me. Sometimes friends come over. Sometimes nobody does. Sometimes Grant sends a photograph of something ridiculous. Sometimes Dad texts about rain. Sometimes I think of Willow Creek. And yes, sometimes I miss it enough that it physically hurts. Then I look at the rosemary beside my steps. It has grown into a thick green bush. Last summer, I cut some for dinner and suddenly remembered be sitting behind my parents' house, telling me I would get tired one day. She was right. I used to think getting tired meant I had failed. Now I think exhaustion was the first honest message my body sent me. It was telling me the arrangement could not continue. The hardest lesson was not learning how to say no. The hardest lesson was learning that the people who benefit from your lack of boundaries may experience your boundaries as betrayal. That does not make them betrayal. For years, I thought being a good daughter meant preventing my parents from experiencing the consequences of their choices. I paid. I organized. I repaired. I anticipated. I absorbed. Then I wondered why they never understood how heavy the load was. Of course they didn't. I kept lifting it before it reached them. The day I stopped was not graceful. It did not look loving to everyone. It cost me a house full of memories and a version of my family I had spent most of my life protecting. But it gave me something I had never possessed before. A life that did not require permission. A home where my name on the deed and my place at the table mean the same thing. A brother I can speak to without funding him. A father who is finally learning that neutrality is still a choice. Friends who do not need me to earn my chair. And a quiet Sunday morning where nothing is broken that I am expected to fix. If you know someone who has spent years confusing sacrifice with belonging, send this story their way. Tell me in the comments what boundary changed your life. Subscribe for more stories about rebuilding after family betrayal, and I'll meet you in the next episode.